So this presentation is on digital preservation. The presenters today are myself. My name is Sara Davis, and I'm the Wyoming State Archivist. I've been in this position since September 2021. Prior to that, I worked as the University Archivist for the University of Wyoming at the American Heritage Center. And then I worked as a digital archivist project manager for the National Association of Olmsted Parks at the Frederick Olmsted National Historic Site in Brookline, Massachusetts. I have a Master's of Science in Library Science with an Archives Management emphasis from Simmons University and a Digital Archives Specialist Certificate from the Society of American Archivists. I serve as the immediate past chair on the Digital Archives Specialist Subcommittee and on various subcommittees and committees for the Council of State Archivists. Cindy Brown, who is my co-presenter today, is the digital archivist for the Wyoming State Archives. For the first 25 years at the State Archives, she worked in the research room, assisted in archiving public and private collections, and helped establish many of the archival databases currently in use. For the last 14 years, Cindy has been working with digital records, including developing strategies for archiving and preserving permanent records and long-term electronic records. Recent projects include researching options for managing and preserving emails. She serves as an administrator for the digital archives software that we use here at the State Archives, and she also has her digital archives specialist certificate. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cindy.
Hey. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So I guess my first disclaimer is anybody who knows anything about digital preservation knows that you can't cover it all in 1 hour. I'm going to try to pick a few highlights that I think are most critical. And I think it's ironic when I listen to the records management programs that they seem to overlap or dovetail quite a bit. So first off, we drafted some general guidelines for use by state agencies with recommended practices for scanning or digitizing records, but they do carry over to other organizations as well. And some of the slides, the tables have come out of that. And then it also shows a link to our website. Trying to figure out how to, there we go. So there, in my mind, there's at least two big questions which should be considered when working with long-term digital records. One, now that you have the digital records, will you be able to open them 10 years from now? Two, will you be able to find them? And those are the two big challenges. And I know there's way more than two. And if you want, you can dig deeper. But I think these should definitely be considered when working with digital records or when planning the project. Okay, so first we're going to address the access question. So when you're scanning documents or setting up a system defaults, it's a good idea to consider which bit depth you want to select. So for example, and then also should the documents be black and white, grayscale, or color. So the table here shows the different types of documents and how you can safely apply it. So if it's like a totally typewritten document, the 1-bit or bitonal, it will work. For black and white photos, halftone illustrations and handwriting, you can look at 8-bit grayscale. And as far as the bit depth, I look at 256 shades of gray. Your scanners can go way higher, but what you run into a lot is if you try to open them with another software, it won't. They won't open. So, you know, it's kind of like when you go to scan things in color. If you do millions of colors, it limits what software you can use to access it. It's a good approach for when you are creating masters. So, which goes on to the next line, which is I use 24-bit color. It produces approximately 16 million colors. And that's primarily used for color graphics test, color photographs, art drawings, and maps. Now, we've had some discussion here in the archives whether black and white photos should also be scanned as color. It comes down to a storage decision. Can you afford to store all of your black and white photos as color, or will grayscale work? I don't think we've totally worked that one out. But the goal with this is you only want to have to scan these records once, or for born digital records, things that have never been paper, to ensure that they're readable as much as possible. Okay, so it's also a good idea to consider what resolution to select. Similar to the other slide, the type of record being scanned or saved may determine the resolution that's needed. So for textual records, it could range anywhere from 300 to 600 DPI. For photographs, negatives, and slides, it's 400 to 800 pixels in a long dimension. And the reason why I phrase it that way is it all depends on the size of the photo as to what level you scan it at. If it's a slide, you're going to need to increase the resolution because it's going to need more help getting larger. And again, for textual records, 300 to 600 DPI, photos, negatives, and slides, that's the 600 DPI, which is our normal default. So you can set your resolution to 600, but you can increase your dimensions to the 4,000 to 8,000 to make sure it's the size you need. So the premise behind it is, the logic is, are you going to need to blow up or zoom in on the scan? So for the archives, photos usually require higher resolution because people want different sizes of photos printed. And again, like I said, the smaller photos require even higher because they start small. But a map, which is already large, doesn't need to be scanned at such a large resolution because it's already starting large. So that's why it's okay for a map to be 300 DPI, unless it's like teeny. Okay, oops, I got you right. See if the slide stays. Okay. Another thing concerning access is what file format you choose to save it as is critical for digital records. Generally, again, it all depends on what it is. If it's an image, the preferred formats are JPEG 2000 TIFF. We do ours as TIFFs for our masters. JPEG 2000 is pretty similar to TIFF, but, and I'm showing my bias here a little bit, but you need different software to be able to open it. The normal software that I can use to open a TIFF will not open a JPEG 2000. And then JPEG has some issues because when you go to save a JPEG, if it's not set a certain way, it will compress, make it smaller. And if you keep making changes to it and saving it, the scan gets worse and worse. And so I generally stay away from JPEGs unless I'm doing an access copy. But for the masters, not a good idea. For text files, you can do a text. There's a whole list. HTML, PDF, PDF-A, Open Office, XML. We tend, or TIFFs, to be honest. We tend towards PDFs, PDFAs. The advantage to those, because when we scan them, if they're more than one page, they're scanned with more than one page. They're not separated out. You can do it either way. Again, it comes down to balancing the best way you can do it with how much storage you actually are able to pay for. Speaking of being able to pay for stuff, audio, the next two, audio and video, they really take up a lot of storage. But you really need to, on your masters, make sure that you save them at a level. And if you can't afford it, then, then you need to decide. You can either afford it, or you have to determine what you can afford to do, how many you can afford to do. Anyway, for audio, generally our masters are waves. There's also, I'm thinking it's a BF wave that is used. It's also similar to wave, but we do them wave. Video, there's MP4s and AVIs. I like MP4 because it's widely used. It's easy to use, but AVI has its advantage as well. Databases. Databases and Excel spreadsheets can be tricky because, in particular with spreadsheets, it's easy to save it as a PDF, but then you end up losing the formulas inside that, a lot of the fields are created based on formulas, and you end up losing that. It is more and more common to be able to save them to CSV, which is a good alternative. I did want to warn you that you want to watch out for some of the odd proprietary type formats. So, for example, years ago, we purchased a machine that would microfilm and scan at the same time, and we used a software called DocuWare that created TIFFs. So it sounds good, TIFFs. That's what you want. Yeah. The problem was they weren't TIFFs per se, they were DocuWare TIFFs. And in order to open them, you had to have the software and the server. And so that totally made them unusable for long-term storage, because who's going to keep the same server to be able to access them? And so we ended up having to convert them all. And so, and I've even noticed in Adobe, when I go to save Adobe Photoshop, when I go to save something in Photoshop as a PDF, it's not just a PDF, it's an Adobe PDF. And it's fine. It's as far as opening it. It's just if you look at the file size, it's way bigger than a regular PDF. Things to keep in mind. Okay, and let's go to the next one. Pretty sure I clicked it. Try my keyboard. There we go. Guess it likes my keyboard instead of my laptop. So here's some examples of proprietary formats and their alternatives. As we discussed with Excel, you can do a CSV file. With Word, you can do a plain, like a .txt, or if format's needed, you can do a PDF or PDFA. PowerPoint can also be saved as a PDF, PDFA. Photoshop, because I use it, can be saved as a TIFF. And then the QuickTime MOV is a MPEG-4 or MP4. One of the things that I think archivists look at too is we need to be realistic. It'd be nice if everybody used the same formats that we think they should use, but they're going to use the popular ones. And so you need to balance out the idea of when you get something in, are you going to create a copy of it in the format you want? Or are you and pay for that extra storage? Or are you going to just keep in mind at some point, you're probably going to need to migrate it? And so you can. And in case you're wondering why I like the PDF format, and archivists, all of the archivists that are in the meeting, they all know this, but for those of you who aren't, PDFs were developed by a federal government agency with long-term accessibility in mind. They're set up to be backwards compatible, meaning that the current Adobe Reader can open the earlier PDF versions. But being paranoid archivist type, the reality is at some point we may end up needing to migrate the PDFs to a new format. It's just the reality of having long-term digital records that in the back of your mind, you may need to migrate them. Sounds really negative, but it's realistic. Okay, so now we're going on to the second question is, will you be able to find them? And I'll pick up the pace a little bit here, but file naming, as we covered it in the records management area, file naming is essential for locating digital records. You know, many scanners and cameras, when they auto number the documents that come out, and the number is arbitrary, and in most cases doesn't help you find it. You know, works well if you have a like a management system which tracks the docket number and ties it to your data entry form or spreadsheet for more details. But if at the very least, I suggest that you add these auto numbered documents to a folder that has a descriptive name. So at least you have a folder that gives you a target to find. And in talking about the system that may track docket numbers or document numbers, you need to keep in mind at some point you may need to switch systems, switch the software. And so you have to have a strategy in place on how you're gonna pull out a CSV file that has the links to be able to load it to your new system. My friends at ETS call it an exit strategy. Doesn't mean it's gonna happen, but you wanna be prepared with what your plan is. Let's see. So at the very least, you want to put them in a folder with a descriptive name. And then if the slide will advance. Or you can channel your inner archivist and rename each document and folder. The file name in the folder should include enough details to help future staff understand its contents. And the name should include as much data information as known, because we all know that at some point computers have a tendency to change dates, like creation dates and modification dates, if you're not careful with how you handle things. So on Thursday, we're going to spend some time discussing some tools and softwares that we use to help with digital preservation. But I'm going to go ahead and shift this back to Sarah, who's going to cover the section on social media. And again, any questions at all, please let me know.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I moved
Cindy.
it on you, didn't I?
I think I moved it.
Okay. She's like, she's going to take away my control.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Deborah, we'll get to your a question here in a little bit. So I just want to talk a little bit about social media and websites. From Stephanie's presentation earlier today, here in Wyoming, we don't care what the format is of a record. It is a record if you create it on part of doing your business. And so websites and social media can be considered a record of your agency or your business. So something to think about if you want to preserve those type of records is who owns the content of the social media and website accounts and postings. Is the content available through public access, or does it require a login? Sometimes if it's you have somebody has a special Facebook account and you have to log in to be able to access that content, that means that it's more intended to be a private conversation. Is the content included in social media, in the social media post or website already included in another type of record, such as a press release? Social media and websites have been around for a very long time, but I will say that the archives field is ever changing and how best to tackle capturing these type of records. So if it's usually easier and it's quite a bit smaller if you are able to capture that content in another format. And then the last consideration that you want to think about when you're wanting to capture social media or website records is whether there's meaningful interaction in the post or site that you want to capture. So for example, if you make a post on your Facebook account about some kind of new park going into effect, and there's going to be new regulations to that, and there are members of the public that are interacting with that new information, you may really want to consider that is your public comment, and you need to capture that type of record to be able to show what you did and provide evidence that you did try to get the word out about what was going on and that you were listening to your audiences. So, here in Wyoming, again, it's all about the content, how you deal with social media, websites, and any other type of record. Essentially, it's all about the content of those records. So, from our first presentation, Stephanie talked about Wyoming state statutes, particularly says that a public record includes the original and all copies of any paper, correspondence, book, form, photograph, photostat, regardless of the physical, digital, or electronic form or correct characteristics. And especially if they have been created or made, received, or in transacting public business by the state or political division or an agency of the state. And as Stephanie already talked about, this actually extends a little bit further beyond just state agencies and local government. It talks about municipalities. This is talking about if you receive funding from the state of Wyoming, the University of Wyoming is also creating public records every day. And there is some exceptions to that rule for education purposes, but you just have to think about, you are transacting business using public funds. And so all these public records are the property of the state, and they should be delivered to your outgoing officials and employees to their successors. And the intent of this is to be able to continue to record history of your department, everything that's been done, and be able to continue business regularly. And for Wyoming, these statutes are all in 9-2, 400 series, or in the 1600 series. So we talked a lot about why these are records, why social media and website are records, but there end a little bit that it's really hard to try to capture these type of records. The technology is changing all the time. So if you're on a really limited budget, or you're just starting to think about what you can do to capture these essential records, things you want to actually think about is make sure that the content is open to the public again. If you are being directly chatted through a private message from somebody, those kind of interactions could be considered private interactions. In archives, these would probably be more regarded as correspondence that you're receiving from somebody. When somebody is corresponding with you in a letter, the person that wrote the letter actually owns the copyright of that letter. So think about that in some way. With technology changing every day, you really want to start capturing your content right away. We have seen in social media that it's on news articles that social media is really quick and easy to delete. There's been a lot of talk about Twitter feeds being deleted or comments being deleted right away. So if it's really important to capture that kind of interaction and content, start doing it right away. Besides the fact that, technology is changing all the time, the sooner that you start those captures is the quicker that you're going to be able to preserve that material, just due to the file formats, the evolution of technology. If you are going to use social media or websites, I think it's really prudent of you to go ahead and put a disclaimer on your accounts that these are public records, so people know that if they're going to interact with you, that is going to be captured forever or has a possibility to be created forever. Another strategy that we don't usually think that is a good strategy, you wouldn't think is a good strategy, but it does work, is to create a PDF of the content on your website. This actually came up a couple of years ago. I was trying to capture the Black Student Center's website at the University of Wyoming. They were putting on a lot of programming, and they wanted to capture the social interactions on that website. And unfortunately, we couldn't really get a good grasp or a good capture of that interaction. And so we found that the best way to do that was actually to create a PDF of that interaction. Of course, a really good tool to use is web crawling software, which we'll talk a little bit more here in the next few slides. That does usually cost a little bit of resources for that, but it is doable. Use backup tools to back up your websites. Ask the vendor directly for the content. You never know if that's going to be a good option or not. When I was also trying to capture that interaction on social media, we did, experiment a little bit with copy and pasting into a Word document, and that did work to some extent. So just feel free to experiment and try different ways. Not every web capturing software is perfect, and every technology or platform works differently as well. So it might take a little bit of finagling. You can export your social media information into a CSV format if you're so interested in capturing that type of information. You can print and file it. And then, of course, there's APIs to create a customized tool to download, like a database, for example. So a couple of years ago, Cindy Brown we were trying to figure out what we were going to do to capture our own social media. And there's a lot of our governmental offices that are creating social media all the time, and we're trying to figure out the best strategy for capturing that type of information. So Cindy created this table where we looked at Archive Social, Smarsh, and Page Freezer, which are the top 3 used types of softwares to capture that. So this kind of gives you a checkbox, kind of what each kind of software does. You'll note here on the bottom where it talks about the pricing. Most software companies, unfortunately, will keep their software prices hidden because it's always up to negotiation. But you'll see here on Archive Social, there's a couple of different sizes of software. And Smarsh already has like a number of profiles used, and you can see this on the government state agency rates. And then Page Freezer appears to be based on the type of service and the number of accounts that you have. So there's a lot of configuration options here. So other ways to capture social media is also through web archiving. I have a lot of experience just generally archiving websites, and just a full disclosure, we do use some of these tools, but we don't use all of these tools here at the State Archives. Things you want to actually consider is who developed the software, how much it costs, is it actually sustainable within your agency or your business, and what kind of expertise you have on here in your office, and what is the cost of human resources as well as physical space, digital space as well here. So the first one we're going to talk about a little bit is the Wayback Machine, which is essentially the Internet Archive. It was developed and maintained by the Internet Archive. It's a good way. Anybody can actually try put in a request to capture a website, but it just depends on whether it was accepted or not to be able to capture that. Web Recorder is a great tool for open source, and it's an open source tool, which means it's free for you to be able to use and experiment with. And it just means that you have to support it yourself in some format, and you need to learn how to use it. WordCreate was developed by Chrome, and so there are some kind of limitations to that software because of that. Some other tools that are widely used is Archivist. I know that we use it here at the State Archives. This was one of the main forerunners of archive tools out there and still highly respected. It's a subscription service, and it could be used for large organizations. And I know that this is also one of those softwares that you can use that the price is dependent on negotiation and the size of your organization and how much you're going to use in terms of storage. Other tools here are Heretics, which is an open source web crawler project designed to respect the robots TXT files and other exclusions, which can be challenging for some websites. There is MirrorWeb, which is a non-academic subscription web archiving tool. It does social media as well and public archiving, and it's used in the public and private sector. And then there's Web Curator tool, which is an open source workflow management application for selective web archiving. And it's basically used for larger organizations. Non-technical users can manage the application and the web archives. So that was a really quick overview of some digital preservation tools, online tools, and resources. We'd be happy to talk about other types of software and equipment that we use, but I think we'll just start with our first question that we got from Deborah, who asked, what is your opinion about PNG files for images? What are the pros and cons? Currently, I use TIFF format, or if needing to preserve storage space, JPEG.
You know, I figured out when I read the question that I totally glossed over the whole premise of you. Generally, when you're doing digital preservation, you create a master version of it. And then anytime you want to share it with anybody, you create what's called a derivative, or I like to call it a bite-sized version. And in my mind, and Sarah, you can weigh in, my mind, PNG is an example of a bite-sized format. I don't think it's, I think it's got compression issues. So I apologize that I didn't really spell out that generally I was discussing the masters and not the derivatives. And then we didn't really get into the whole, you want to have 3 copies, backup copies, and right, and in geographically diverse areas. So for like the digital archives, one of our backups is stored somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I think Google, a lot of the cloud services really help take the pressure off of that. You just have to make sure and get them, get it secured the way you want it to, so somebody can't come in and screw up your collection. So sorry, I digressed.
Right. So Deborah, I just wanted to add in there. Yeah, that's a pretty great question. Here at the archives, we create our master files as TIFFs, and then we usually have our access copies as JPEGs. PNG is also a really good a pretty good lower level type of record. Sorry, I got distracted there. A smaller version of a TIFF file, and PNG used PNGs mostly, I think, for websites, if I remember right. And so you can use that kind of thing for access copies. I think it just does have, you'd lose bits of information by having PNGs or keeping that as your master file.
When it's kind of off topic too, but a lot of times when I create our master files, I go ahead and create the derivative or the bite-sized copy at the same time. You've got it open and you know you need to create it. So that's just me. And particularly with the audio, you know, with the WAV file, you know, I generate the MP3 right away, because then I don't have to reopen up the WAV file.
Right. So, Deborah, I hope that helps. Oh, yes, she said that answered her question. So great. We'd be happy to talk to you more about it too. Stephanie asked, can you address easy ways of checking for fixity? We do that once a month, so I'll let you take that one.
Well, we're able to do it once a month because the Digital Archivist has a setting where it'll do what we call integrity checks every month for each of the document stores or the agency's records. And it'll check the scan and the data entry form and make sure they're still connected and that they haven't changed. And it'll also generate hashes for them. So, you know, anybody who knows anything about like Bitcoin or anything knows about how hashes are set up, and they're distinct for each item. And so if you change something like a comma, it changes the hash. And so it's a good way to check it. So we're kind of spoiled that we have a system that does that. There is other software that you can use to check for fixity. I know the old school one that I use is Karen's directory printer. It'll allow you to create basically a manifest from either the folder list or the document list, and it includes the hash capability. So you can use that to compare it. I don't know on our slides for tomorrow for tools if we really addressed it, but we could probably put something in if hopefully you'll be back tomorrow, Thursday. We put something in.
Can you say the name of it again?
Sorry?
Can you say the name of that tool again? I missed it.
Oh, I use, back before we had our system, I use Karen's directory printer, which is like a really, really old school one, but it has the capability. It's free, it's open source, it is available online. There are other programs, other software that will do the same thing. That's just what I used to use. But again, Sarah and I can put our heads together and put a slide together for Fixity check for tomorrow afternoon.
That would be great. I've tried to find some online or things, and I just have really had a hard time coming up with ones. And there was a really great product out there, and it disappeared. It was just like,
we couldn't go too deep today because we didn't have time. But when you bring in a new collection, one of the first things you do is a fixity check. So that way, if it's changed at all, you have a beginning point.
Right.
to check back to.
Okay.
So the fact that you're doing them tells me you know that.
Well, we're actually just getting ready to start a digital archive, mostly photographs, and we want to start the right way. So
Yep.
we want to make sure to have that in place before we get started. Thank you for answering my question.
Sure. A lot of the issues with the open source software is you can't really schedule it to do it. You know, you have to remember to do it. So you have to make it part of your workflow. Anyway, sorry, Sarah.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just wanted to tell everybody that's still on this call, we do, I sent you all a link to our resources folder. And so Cindy and I will add a section on that kind of software to that. That way you'll have the URLs.
Yep.
So remember that, Cindy.
Yeah, we have tomorrow to get it done. So we're golden.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Is there any other questions for us?
Looks like it.
Jessica, you were unmuted earlier. Did you have another question? Okay.
And again, I apologize that there was so much we couldn't cover because we just didn't have the time. But if for some reason you guys want more details, please reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to talk to you.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I just want to add is, you know, and what Cindy was getting at earlier today is that there's a lot of recommendations out there for digital preservation, and there's a lot of different levels that you can get to for perfect digital preservation. But to be realistic a little bit, we need to think about what's actually manageable and what we can do in the meantime, and come up with a strategy or plan to work up towards the optimal. You know, we do have the ability to have 3 master copies and at least 2 in different geographically different locations. But if you don't have the resources to be able to do that, having 2 copies, I think, is just fine. It's a start. So when you start embarking on your digital preservation plans or strategies, think about what you can reasonably do and then document what you plan to do. And that's something, and then think about what you want to do in the future. And that's just, you know, one way to get started. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Cindy.
But I just remembered one of the tools that I played with that I didn't add on my list for Thursday, but Preservica has a free account that you can sign up for that gives you, I can't remember if it's like 5 gigabytes of free storage.
Yep.
So it allows you to play with how you would set it up in Preservica and what it will do for you. And it doesn't commit you to a subscription or to purchasing anymore. So I've actually done Preservica myself. Just we don't have it here. So I played with it. And one of the things I really like is when you add something to Preservica, it will automatically look at the file format and generate a long-term preservation version of it. You know, whereas our system, we have to ask it to. Or if you don't have a system, you have to decide. And so I think that's really slick.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat box or any direct messages. Thank you so much for your time today. This is our contact information.